Before Elizabeth I was imprisoned in the Tower under her half-sister Mary I, before she learnt to speak cautiously and reveal nothing, she endured something far more personal. She was just 13 years old. Her father had just died, and one of the most powerful men in England began visiting her bedchamber at dawn. This is Elizabeth in the reign of her half-brother Edward VI, and the scandal that shapes her for life. When Henry VIII died on the 28th of January 1547, 9-year-old Edward VI became king. Real power, of course, did not rest with the boy king. It rested with his uncle, Edward Seymour, now Lord Protector. But Edward had another uncle, Thomas Seymour. Ambitious, charismatic, restless, and determined not to be overshadowed by his elder brother. Just weeks after Henry VIII's death, Thomas Seymour met with his brother to gain his consent for his marriage to the Lady Mary, the late king's eldest daughter. The Lord Protector appears to have been amused by the idea, reproaching his brother for setting his sights on Mary when neither of them was born to be king nor to marry king's daughters, and pointing out that he knew the Lady Mary would never consent. And she didn't. She found the idea laughable when she heard about it. So it appears that Thomas Seymour moved on to her younger half-sister, writing to the 13-year-old Elizabeth, proposing marriage. Elizabeth too turned him down, explaining that she was too young, was still in mourning, and wished to remain single for at least 2 years. It was not an out-and-out rejection, but Seymour didn't wait. In early March 1547, he secretly married Elizabeth's stepmother, the Dowager Queen Catherine Parr. If he couldn't marry the king's sister, he would marry the late king's widow. Before the marriage became public, Elizabeth joined Catherine's household at Chelsea and later Hanworth. At first glance, this might have seemed safe. Catherine had been a warm and nurturing presence in Elizabeth's life. She'd encouraged her education and fostered her confidence. But once married, Catherine's legal power would diminish sharply. As historian Elizabeth Norton explains, married Tudor women, even queen dowagers, were subject to their husband's authority. Thomas Seymour would control the household. When Catherine and Seymour's marriage became known at court, the Lady Mary was angry and upset. After all, her stepmother should have been in mourning. And she was also worried about Elizabeth, deeming it inappropriate that she should live with the out-of-favour couple. She wrote to her half-sister advising her to leave the household and to come and live with her instead. Elizabeth refused the generous offer, but that was to be a big mistake. At first, Cat Ashley, who was Elizabeth's friend, governess and lady, and Elizabeth were very taken with Catherine Parr's dashing new husband. But then things changed, and Seymour took advantage of Elizabeth's admiration for him. As the new head of the household, Seymour had access to everything, including Elizabeth's most private spaces. He had a key to her bedroom, and she was unchaperoned at night, for Cat Ashley had had her pallet bed removed, viewing the bedroom as far too small for both of them. What happened next we know from sworn interrogations given in 1549 by Cat Ashley, then Elizabeth's cofferer Thomas Parry, and John Harrington, a man who served Thomas Seymour. Ashley testified that starting in June 1547, Seymour would come into Elizabeth's chamber early in the morning, sometimes before she was dressed, sometimes before she was even out of bed. If she was up, he would strike her familiarly on the back of her buttocks. If she was in bed, he would open the curtains and make as though he would come at her. Elizabeth would shrink further into the bed so he couldn't reach her. On one occasion, he tried to kiss her in bed. On another, he entered in his nightgown, that is to say his shirt, and I quote, bare-legged in slippers, so naked under his shirt. And then there is the garden incident at Hanworth, when Catherine Parr held Elizabeth while Thomas slashed her gown into 100 pieces. What was Catherine Parr thinking? It's possible that she convinced herself it was harmless play, or perhaps she didn't want to see what was happening in her own household. She didn't have power. Seymour was the head of the household. But others were alarmed. Cat Ashley reprimanded Seymour. Parry was concerned. The household whispered. And Elizabeth began rising earlier, fully dressed at her books before he could reach her. That detail tells us a great deal. But here we must tread carefully. There is evidence that Elizabeth may have been flattered by Seymour. She was reported to blush when his name was mentioned. But this does not shift responsibility. She was just 13 when all this started, and he was nearly 40. And he was her stepmother's husband. He was head of the household, and he had a key to her chambers. This wasn't a romance. It was a man in authority pushing boundaries repeatedly. His behaviour was inappropriate and predatory. And that's not looking at it through a modern lens. There were concerns back then. In June 1548, Catherine Parr discovered Elizabeth and Seymour in an embrace. The next day, Elizabeth was sent away to Cheshunt. She never saw Catherine again. That summer, Elizabeth suffered severe illness, migraines, digestive problems, irregular periods, jaundice, anxiety, and rumours began that she was pregnant. In January 1549, Elizabeth wrote indignantly denying the shameful slanders that she was with child by the Lord Admiral, Thomas Seymour. She even offered to come to court to prove her innocence. She was just 15 at this time, but she was already defending her honour in writing to the government. After Catherine's death in September 1548, Seymour had moved recklessly. He'd sought to undermine his brother, the Lord Protector, to gain control of the king and once again position himself near Elizabeth. In January 1549, he was arrested. He was accused of plotting to kidnap Edward VI and of intending to marry Elizabeth without council consent. He was executed on the 20th of March 1549 as a traitor. Elizabeth was interrogated at this time, and Thomas Parry and Cat Ashley were detained at the Tower. Here, for the first time, we see the steel that would define Elizabeth's reign. She was interrogated about her relationship with Seymour by Sir Robert Tyrwhitt, who, like everyone else, had heard rumours of some kind of relationship between them and was looking for confirmation. Elizabeth kept her cool, and all Tyrwhitt was able to get out of her was confirmation that there was indeed gossip circulating that Seymour was looking to marry her and that he'd been asking about her finances and estates. Despite the threats that were almost certainly used against her, and the fact that she was told that Thomas Parry had told everything, Elizabeth insisted that she would never marry, neither in England nor out of England, without the consent of the King's Majesty, Your Graces, that's Somerset, and the councils, according to the terms of her father's will. Tyrwhitt had no evidence against Elizabeth, and although her servants continued to be detained until shortly before Seymour's execution, Elizabeth was in the clear. She answered cautiously, she admitted nothing incriminating, and she protected herself. Did this experience shape Elizabeth? It's impossible to make any solid conclusions. We don't know Elizabeth's most personal thoughts. But this time surely had an impact on her. A powerful man had entered her bedchamber uninvited. He'd placed her reputation at risk. He'd involved her in political conspiracy, and he'd forced her to defend her honour publicly. Years later, as Queen, Elizabeth would refuse to marry. Did that decision have anything to do with Thomas Seymour? We cannot say. But she had learned at a young age that marriage could mean loss of control. She'd seen that with Catherine Parr. and Elizabeth valued control above almost everything. Under Edward VI, Elizabeth was not imprisoned, but she was tested emotionally, politically, and in her ability to protect herself. These were harsh lessons, scary lessons. But by the time Mary came to the throne, Elizabeth knew that keeping silent could save you, careful words could protect you, and survival required discipline. And these lessons would definitely help her survive what would be thrown at her during Mary's reign. If you've enjoyed this video, then please do subscribe and help me reach 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I'd really appreciate your help with that. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.